kind friends all gather round. There's something I would say, that what brings us together here has blessed us all today. Love has made a circle that holds us all inside, where strangers are as family and loneliness can't hide. You must give yourself to love, if love is what you're after. Open up your heart to the tears and laughter, and give yourself to love. Give yourself to love. I've walked these mountains in the rain. I've learned to love the wind. I've been up before the sunrise to watch the day begin. I always knew I'd find you, though I never did know how. But like sunrise on a cloudy day, you stand before me now. You must give yourself to love, if love is what you're after. Open up your heart to the tears and laughter, and give yourself to love. Give yourself to love. Love is born of fire. It's planted like a seed. Love can give you everything, but it gives you what you need. Love comes when you're ready. Love comes when you're afraid. It will be your greatest teacher, the best friend you have made. You must give yourself to love, if love is what you're after. Open up your heart to the tears and laughter, and give yourself to love. Give yourself to love.
Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Amherst. I'm Reverend Michelle Buchheit, the minister of this congregation. My pronouns, which I offer to create a truly inclusive and brave space for all to live into the fullness of their identities, are she and her. Today I'll be joined up front by our Director of Faith Development, Angela Warren, Sonia Jensen-Schell at the piano, and our guest speaker, Emily Garrick. As Unitarian Universalists, we are people of the wide path, engaging in a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, and coming together to make a difference. We're so glad that you have chosen to be here in person and virtually. For those gathered in the chapel this morning, I invite you to put your phones on reverence mode, silencing them so that you and all may be fully present and free from distraction. You may have noticed as you came in that there, at the round table at the back of the chapel, there are rocks and shells and all kinds of interesting things to create a morning altar, which is our combined creativity to create something beautiful and something that is not lasting, purposely not lasting. I will note that yesterday we had a board retreat and leadership retreat, and the folks made morning altars themselves that are in the Emerson room in the fellowship hall. So when you go to gather for coffee later, I hope that you will admire and take a good look at what they have created, all with found objects. That's the one, well, there are two rules. It has to be items found in nature and add on to what someone has already started, but don't detract or change, taking away. So it is definitely an exercise in beloved community. As we gather, we acknowledge that our church is built on occupied land that was nurtured and cherished by the First Nations people of this region, the Haudenosaunee, and before them, the Neutrals. May we be good stewards of the land and courageously cultivate community with all living things. I invite you to join me in the spirit of our chalice lighting as I give some words from Reverend Molly Brewer. It's entitled, A Chalice Lighting for When Things Aren't Okay. My beloved people, I cannot pretend, and so I will not tell you that everything is okay right now, that there is no reason to be angry, that you must be optimistic or at peace. I cannot pretend these things, and so I won't tell them to you. But now we light our chalice. And so all I ask in this moment is that we remember the words of Rebecca Parker. There is a love. There is a love holding us. There is a love holding all. By the light of our chalice, let us rest in this love. We are a beloved community, a gathering of people who have chosen to journey together, to encourage one another, and to be part of something important and life-changing. Because we aspire to be such a people, we make bold promises about how we will be with one another. I invite you to join me as we speak our congregation's covenant. Please, together we promise to gather in compassionate unity, to celebrate diversity of thought and unity of spirit, and to seek wholeness for ourselves, our children, and our world. And now Angela will offer a time for all ages.
This story is about a time when a group of Unitarian Universalists had to make a difficult decision together and needed to listen to each other. Unitarian Universalism is a living faith. We think that people should be free to believe what they must believe, the truth of their life experiences, instead of professing a belief in what we are told to believe. This is what we mean when we say ours is a creedless religion. Being a living faith means that any one of us can change what we believe if we experience a deeper truth that contradicts our previous beliefs. But in order to change, you have to be open to new thoughts, new ideas, and new experiences. You have to have your ears open to hear the experiences of the people with whom you are in community. There is a saying that people were created with 2 ears and 1 mouth because we should listen twice as much as we speak. When we come together in community, we have the opportunity to listen to each other and to gain a perspective greater than what we would have alone. Sometimes we listen with our ears. When you are part of a sacred, beloved community, you listen not only with your ears, but also with your heart. A listening heart has the power to help us be better people. In 1948, most congregation and houses of worship in the United States, 1948, were segregated, separated by the color of their members' skin. Some were segregated by law, others by custom or by lack of actively trying to welcome and include all people. The First Unitarian Society of Chicago was one of these congregations. Although their church was located in a neighborhood with many African Americans, only whites could join, according to the written bylaws or rules of the church, and according to custom. The day came that many members began to believe that they needed to take action against racism if they really wanted to live their values and principles. The minister, the Reverend Leslie Pennington, was ready for this day and ready to take action. So was James Luther Adams. James Luther Adams was a famous liberal theologian and social ethicist, a person who studies religion, beliefs, and values. Dr. Adams taught at the Meadville Lombard Theological School, right across the street from the First Unitarian Society of Chicago, and he was a member of the congregation's board of directors, a leader in the congregation. Along with some others, Reverend Pennington and James Luther Adams proposed a change in the church's bylaws to desegregate the church and welcome people whatever the color of their skin. They wanted to include, not exclude. They saw this as a way to put their love into action. When the congregation's board of directors considered the desegregation proposal, most of them supported it. However, one member of the board objected. "Your new program is making desegregation into a creed," he said. "You are asking everyone in our church to say they believe desegregating or inviting, even recruiting people of color to attend church here is a good way to tackle racism. What if some members don't believe this?" Desegregation was a very controversial topic. In 1948, anything about skin color and racism was controversial. Some people, even some who supported African Americans in demanding their civil liberties, believed in a separate but equal policy, which kept people apart based on their skin color. Respectful debate ensued at the First Unitarian Society of Chicago. Both sides felt in their hearts that their belief was right. Perhaps they were so busy trying to be heard that they forgot to listen, and so they kept on talking. The debate went on in the board of directors meeting until the early hours of the morning. Everyone was exhausted and frustrated. Finally, James Luther Adams remembered that we should be listening twice as much as talking. He asked the person who had voiced the strongest objection, "What do you say is the purpose of this church?" Suddenly, everyone was listening. Everyone wanted to hear the answer to this crucial question. Probably the person who objected was listening especially hard to his own heart, as well as to the words he had heard from other board members through the long discussion. The board member who opposed opening the church to people of color finally replied, "Okay, Jim, the purpose of this church is to get hold of people like me and change them." The First Unitarian Society of Chicago successfully desegregated. There are things that you know, and there are things that I know. When we are together and listening to each other with ears and with hearts, We know more.
Each of us carries with us into this time cares and concerns, joys and sorrows. Together, we create the container where we can put down our burdens, knowing that they are held gently by this gathered community. For those joining virtually, I invite you to give voice to that which is on your heart, or perhaps type it into the chat in the live stream. For those here in the chapel, I invite you to come forward and to place a stone or a shell on the table labyrinth in recognition of that which is on your heart. Please join me in a communal response. In this gathered community, we hold one another and the world in love. I'm very glad to introduce our guest speaker this morning, Emily Garrick. Emily is a middle school teacher in Jamestown and lifelong member of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Jamestown, where she has also served as president. Les and I are longtime friends with her family, so it is with some pride that I welcome her to the pulpit of UU Amherst. Okay, I can't resist. I've known Emily since before she was born. I still receive the Jamestown newsletter, so I was intrigued when I saw the title of this sermon, offered earlier this summer there, and I asked Emily if I could read the text. You see, there is something afoot in the larger family of Unitarian Universalism, something that has the potential to strengthen us or to divide us, just as our forebears were divided over desegregation. Emily's thoughtful reflection clearly presents the issues and puts the responsibility exactly where it belongs in our covenantal faith, in all of us. This could very well be the most important sermon you hear this year. Listen with your heart. No pressure.
Oh, good morning. It's good to be with you all today. My grandfather, Philip William Schlick, was a minister in the United Methodist Church. I'm not a Methodist per se, but I do keep tabs on them. My dad's family are all Methodists, and I've been to a lot of their services. I have a particular love of the United Methodist hymnal. There's some good stuff in there. And I've inherited some opinions about communion that don't have any particular relevance to my own spiritual practice. It's a relationship I never expected to have with any branch of Christianity as someone who was raised a Unitarian Universalist. But for some reason, I find it comforting and familial. The United Methodist Church is like a kindly aunt to me. I don't always agree with her, but I love and respect her anyway. And then there's her ex-husband. After years of fighting, the United Methodist Church announced in April that they will officially split into 2 denominations. Retaining the original name will be the churches that support raising members of the LGBT+ community to clergy positions within their faith, as well as sanctifying same-sex marriages. In the coming months and years, each individual church will have the choice to remain in the United Methodist Conference or to defect to the newly created Global Methodist Church, which will not permit same-sex marriage or ordain gay clergy members. I find myself jumping for joy to know that these more liberal, mostly US-based churches have finally managed to change the narrative, and that they will no longer have to perform marriages and ordinations in open defiance of the larger church governing body. However, at the same time, my heart also breaks for them. A spiritual divorce of this magnitude cannot be easily achieved, and even though I know it's for the best, it will certainly be hard on those affected. Up to now, the United Methodist Church was perhaps the only major Protestant denomination in the United States not to have gone through a schism of one sort or another. Which brings us to Unitarian Universalism. At only 61 years old, we may already have a schism of our own on our hands if we aren't careful. Unfortunately, our differences of opinion cannot be as easily explained and do not fall as clearly along moral lines as should we let gay people get married or not. And as a result, I fear that the potential split in Unitarian Universalism is little understood except by those who go looking for answers. I'm going to attempt to lay out some of the major arguments today. If you're new to Unitarian Universalism or new to thinking about the internal politics of our faith tradition, I will do my best to explain as I go, but know that it's a lot more complicated than I probably have time to get into today. If you listen to the phrases that UUs use to talk about ourselves, it will quickly become obvious that we are an opinionated group of people. You might have heard, for instance, that leading a UU church is like trying to herd cats, or that anywhere you find at least 2 UUs gathered, you can get at least 3 answers to your question. We love talking and debating, digging deep into complicated subject matter, and exercising our right to vote. We employ a system known as Congregational Polity, or Congregationalism, which holds that every individual church is autonomous, but that we can come together in a democratic assembly to make decisions that affect all member congregations. Lots of Protestant churches use this system. Congregational polity can make it difficult to get things done at the regional or national level, especially for organizations such as Quaker yearly meetings, which rely on a consensus-building model for their governance. The Unitarian Universalist Association uses a delegate system, in which each congregation sends delegates to vote on association matters. It's not a perfect system, but it is mostly functional. But not everyone is happy with the way we do things. One dissenter, now disfellowshipped UU minister Todd Eckloff, was the subject of a huge kerfuffle in 2019 when he released his pamphlet, The Gadfly Papers, 3 inconvenient essays by one pesky minister. In it, he argues against the direction that UUA has been moving for the last several years. Eckloff's first inconvenient essay, The Coddling of the Unitarian Universalist Mind, is not surprisingly heavily based on the 2018 book, The Coddling of the American Mind by Greg Lukianoff and Jonathan Haidt. Both the original book and Eckloff's UU fan fiction of it take aim at the growing culture of safetyism, that is, the concept of emotional safety, identity politics, what they call concept creep and linguicide, a familiar argument from the field of prescriptive linguistics, which holds that we should not allow word meanings to change over time, political correctness and call-out culture, and the concept of microaggressions. Specifically, Eckloff argues that the shift in culture within Unitarian Universalism toward asking people to self-monitor their language and try to be careful about what they say so as to not offend others is causing more harm than good in our organization. I can't say I haven't experienced exactly what Eckloff is talking about myself. I'm a member of the Young Adult Revival Network, a group within Unitarian Universalism attempting to do some young adult programming online at the national level. And in 2021, we were asked to craft a worship assembly for a worship service for General Assembly. And the scrutiny on our work was intense. We had to present a full script ahead of time, documenting every word we planned to say in the service, and then went through rigorous edits. My own work was revised extensively by a member of the Disability Caucus, who asked me to change several phrases to make them more inclusive. They suggested changes like move into the circle rather than step into the circle, and turn your attention to rather than look at. Because of the timeline attached to getting things ready for General Assembly, it was an exhausting process, and one that didn't always feel good at the time. But as a good little Unitarian Universalist who wanted my message to reach and be embraced by as many people as possible, I dutifully made the changes. Eckloff calls into question practices like this, as well as what he perceives to be unspoken rules about who can be invited to speak or lead workshops, the historically marginalized, and who cannot, the historically privileged. The second essay in the Gadfly Papers is titled, "I Want a Divorce, a Case for Splitting the Unitarian Universalist Association." Many people over time have complained about what they call a spiritual flatness at the core of Unitarian Universalism, and others have proposed a host of possible things with which to fill that need for something more. You can find people making a variety of suggestions about where we should turn for our spiritual and moral compass, from feminism to Christianity, science, environmental justice, the magic of community, and many, many other sources. Eckloff's contention is that the reason so many people feel spiritually adrift in UU spaces is that when the American Unitarian Association and the Universalist Church of America chose to merge back in 1961, they did so with no logical plan for how to unite their two distinct theologies. He traces the history of what the two denominations believed and how they chose to govern themselves, and argues that their two distinct philosophies could not be easily merged. By trying to come together, Eckloff claims, the Unitarians and the Universalists were each forced to give up so much of their former liturgy, traditions, and theology that the new religion, Unitarian Universalism, had no place to turn for discovering and naming its own spiritual and moral center. Though he suggests that we might be wise to split back into separate Unitarian and Universalist organizations, even Eckloff admits that we may have gone too far down our current path to be able to go back to the way things were before the merge. In his final essay, Let's Be Reasonable, Eckloff goes into great detail about what he calls a rational frame regarding charges of racism and white supremacy within the Unitarian Universalist Association. To understand this, you need a little more background. In 2017, you may have heard about a hiring controversy within UUA. A prestigious leadership position within the southern region of our association was open for applicants. Finalists for the job were vetted and interviewed, and in the end, the region chose a white man over a qualified woman of color. Many Unitarian Universalists, including over 100 ministers, expressed their outrage. The lack of diversity, not just in this one case, but in all of UUA's hiring practices, was called into question. In the turmoil that followed, the president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, Reverend Peter Morales, resigned 3 months before the end of his term, telling UU World magazine, "It was clear I had lost credibility and trust." In the Gadfly Papers, Eckloff contends that there is no proof that the woman of color who reported being passed over for the job was the better candidate, and that arguments in her favor have committed a number of logical fallacies. He says that the term white supremacy is too extreme to describe anything happening within Unitarian Universalism, and that its use is only serving to divide us. But the Gadfly Papers were not the only thing to come out of the 2017 hiring controversy. In May of 2017, just a few months after the controversy came to light, Paula Cole-Jones and Bruce Pollock Johnson, two anti-racist activists in what is now our own Central East region, formally proposed an 8th principle to the UUA. They and other members of their team had been crafting and workshopping language for this principle since 2013. The 8th principle attempts to address the problem that, as they put it, a person can believe they are being a good UU and following the 7 principles without ever thinking about or dealing with racism and other oppressions at the systemic level. The full text of the 8th principle reads, "We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions." That's a lot, so I'm going to read it again. Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community, by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions. You can see how this ideology is in direct opposition to the points made in the Gadfly Papers. And in fact, in many ways, the Gadfly Papers are a direct reaction against this movement in Unitarian Universalism that pushes us more toward anti-racist work. Up to now, at least 125 UU congregations and groups have adopted the 8th principle, and pressure to adopt it nationally has grown a great deal since it was first proposed. While the 2017 General Assembly did not immediately adopt the 8th principle, the UUA Board of Trustees did launch a Commission on Institutional Change, asking them to conduct an audit of white privilege and the structure of power within Unitarian Universalism, and analyze the structural racism and white supremacy culture within UUA. In 2020, after many years of work, the Commission on Institutional Change released their report titled Widening the Circle of Concern. Among their many recommendations was that the UUA use the existing process of an Article 2 review to examine our religious tradition through the lens of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Article 2 is the section of the UUA bylaws that houses our principles and sources. In some ways, Article 2 is the closest thing we have to a Unitarian Universalist theology. Within the body of the text is a provision that we should review this article not less than once every 10 years. You might think of our Unitarian Universalist principles and sources as immutable. I certainly did growing up, but they aren't. We have used the Article 2 review process to make changes in the past. Notably, the principles and sources underwent major rewrites in 1985, including the addition of our 7th principle, respect for the interdependent web of all existence, of which we are a part. So on receiving recommendations in 2020, UUA launched an Article 2 study commission, which is engaged in ongoing work right now to analyze our principles and sources through the lens of equity, hear from UU members and congregations, and ultimately make recommendations about the future of our principles and sources. They are charged with reviewing all of Article 2. But many people expect that the proposal to adopt the eighth principle, or a version of it, will be part of those recommendations when the Commission makes its final report this spring at General Assembly 2023. Incidentally, GA 2023 is a little more in our neck of the woods. It's going to be in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania this year, which is a lot closer than the last one in the Pacific Northwest. And it's a big one. It's a presidential election year, so we're electing a new president of the UUA, of our organization. However, as I did research to try to deepen my understanding of these topics, I came across report after report about the history of racism within Unitarian Universalism. And the reports seemed to be doing what a colleague of mine calls admiring the problem. We, as an institution, vowed to root out and end racist practices in 1841, and again in 1963, and again in 1968, and 1983, and 1992, and 1997, and 2005, and 2017, and 2020, and on and on and on. Now, you might say, isn't it inspiring to know that our faith tradition has been fighting racism for decades? And yeah, it is inspiring. But to that I would say, let me read you a quote from the 1983 report, Empowerment, One Denomination's Quest for Racial Justice from 1967 to 1982. It says, "The history of institutional racism in the Unitarian Universalist Association and its predecessors, the Unitarians and the Universalists, can be summarized succinctly. The more things change, the more they stay the same. It is true that the pages of American history are full of the courageous and inspired acts of individual Unitarians and Universalists who opposed the slave trade, supported the abolitionist movement, played daring and effective roles in the Underground Railroad, worked to better the lot of former slaves, and gave their all to the civil rights struggles of recent times. Yet the institution, the denomination and its Unitarian and Universalist predecessors, has been unable to act effectively and frequently has been unable to even condemn injustice through an official stand. Those peculiarities of institutional character that exist today are historic. The emphasis on individual belief as opposed to corporate credos and the widely touted tolerance for the opinion of others, these tenets have made institutional action impossible in many situations." And all of these reports read about the same. Unitarian Universalism acknowledges our complicated history around race relations, which includes both things we can be proud of and injustices we need to make right. We resolve to engage in anti-racist work within our organization and to do everything in our power to make reparations, uplift the voices of the marginalized, and work to change our culture from one steeped in whiteness to a multicultural, beloved community. But we don't ever seem to do it. This is where that pesky concept of congregational polity that I mentioned before comes into play. Congregational polity, remember, means that each church is technically independent, and our association is a loosely binding relationship that has little authority to enforce change on local congregations. Congregational polity is what led to a deep rift within Unitarian Universalism in 1963, just 2 years after the denominations merged, when the delegates at General Assembly failed to pass a non-discrimination rule for church membership. This is what we were hearing about before in the Story for All Ages. The argument being essentially that if we force churches to allow Black members, we are interfering with the right to autonomy of each individual church. Congregational polity is what has led us to adopt resolution after resolution vowing to make changes, but has not created an environment where those changes are seen as mandatory by our member congregations. Congregational polity is also what allows Mr. Eckloff to continue preaching as the minister of the UU Church of Spokane, Washington. Despite being disfellowshipped by our organization after publishing and promoting his Gadfly Papers and the views espoused within them, Mr. Eckloff's congregation wants to keep him around. They don't care that he has been disfellowshipped by UUA because, under a system of congregational polity, they get to decide who leads them. Now, many members of the Spokane Church did rescind their memberships after the Gadfly Papers brought controversy to their church, but more have stayed. The latest effort by these Gadfly acolytes is something called the Fifth Principle Project. They claim that UUA is no longer a democratic organization and claim that they seek to restore our fifth principle as the governing principle of our denomination. Naturally, they oppose any revision of the current principles and sources, promote the concept of meritocracy, and use the threat of an eroded democracy to push their own agenda, an agenda which specifically opposes the focus on anti-racism that has characterized UUA culture for many years. What's more, they continue to give Mr. Eckloff a platform to discuss his ideas, despite the toxicity he has brought to the faith. At General Assembly 2022, last June, one of the tactics being employed by the Fifth Principle Project was using the provision of nominating candidates by petition to put forth candidates that support their platform. One such candidate campaigned for a seat on the UUA Board of Trustees on the platform that younger and/or marginalized identifying members of our faith, those who have been most in favor of anti-racism, should form their own religion. To my knowledge, none of these candidates, Gadfly candidates, have yet succeeded in earning the seats that they campaigned for. So by now, I'm sure you realize that I have picked a side. I believe the Gadflies will eventually be considered to be on the wrong side of history. I support the adoption of the eighth principle, and I think the work of dismantling oppressive systems is the spiritual richness that so many people crave from Unitarian Universalism. I think that, as the Widening the Circle of Concern report suggests, we need a relationship to congregational polity that emphasizes our covenant to each other, one that places anti-racist work at the center of that covenant. We need individual Unitarian Universalists as well as UU churches and organizations to engage in self-reflection, make reparations as they can, and center the voices and leadership of people of color. And we need to put our money where our mouths are by enacting practices that will lead to more diversity in our hiring, as well as funding ministries geared toward youth, young adults, and historically marginalized groups. Now, this is the part of the sermon where I admit that the title was a little misleading. The upcoming schism in Unitarian Universalism and how we can prevent it. To be honest, I don't know how we prevent something like this from tearing us apart. It may already be too late to avoid. The arguments going on within Unitarian Universalism very closely parallel the arguments among members of the American political left. And in some ways, that means the whole thing is much bigger than us. But even if it hasn't touched your congregation here in Amherst yet, that doesn't mean it won't. You need to decide as a community what side you're on. And it might not be as simple as picking one of the two sides that I've laid out here today, or it might be that simple. But to quote aspiring UU minister Karishma Gottfried, yes, your Unitarian Universalist Church is going to lose people in the next few years. It's a matter of who. The people of color, trans people, disabled people, and allies in our communities who are tired of fighting with their spirits and lives for the Unitarian Universalism we know and love, or those who cling to privilege and comfort and demand to be centered in our faith. I often wonder how my grandfather, the Methodist minister, would approach the schism happening in the Methodist Church today. He performed my parents' wedding ceremony, but if he were still alive, would he have risked his job to perform the wedding of his oldest son to another man? Whatever the truth, I know what I would have wanted him to do. I would want him to defy dissenters by doing what was right. I would want him to uplift the marginalized and support a more inclusive church. And that is the energy I want to bring to Unitarian Universalism. One day, I want my grandchildren to look back at me and know that I did everything in my power to make a better world and a more inclusive, beloved community. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. I will note that yesterday at the Board and Leadership Retreat, we identified understanding and unpacking the 8th principle as a priority for this church year, and so we will be diving into it. You'll also find in the Emerson room on the wall by the kitchen door the 8th principle written out so that you can be making yourself aware of what it is. I look forward to our gatherings and our conversations as we engage in the future of our faith. So thank you, Emily, for bringing that to us. I'm going to invite you to sing with me. It's hymn 108 in your gray hymnal. The words will also be up front. My life flows on, and I invite you to rise, embody your spirit, and shake the wiggles out. My life flows on in endless song above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, the far-off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest round me roars? I know the truth, it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm. While to that rock I'm clinging, since love prevails in heaven and earth. How can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing? You may be seated. We have a very brief video, our meditation in story form. What is peace?
Peace is the beauty in the world. Rolling oceans, towering mountains, and dazzling skies. Peace is feeling well rested. Peace is eating healthy food and feeling full. Peace is reading an amazing story. Peace is knowing you are one of a kind. Peace is making a friend. Peace is when you forgive others. Peace is having wishes come true. Peace is accepting those who are different from you. Peace is having someone to love. Peace is kissing your family goodnight. Peace is feeling calm in your heart. Peace is what we need. What does peace mean to you?
Before we go into the closing
Thanks
portion
so
of
much
our
for
service, I
watching.
share with you some words from Maureen Killoran. No matter how weak or how frightened we may feel, we each have gifts that can make a difference in the world. In this coming week, may you do at least one thing to support the broken, to welcome the stranger, to celebrate what is worthy, to do the work of justice and love. Be strong, be connected, each day act so that you may be a little more whole. Our service is drawing to an end, which means our service to the world is ready to begin. So let me tell you about some opportunities to connect and to serve in the days to come. I remind you that there is a reading group will be meeting on Friday evenings in October, studying Gareth Higgins' book, How Not to Be Afraid. On the glass wall in the lobby, there is a sign-up sheet, and so I invite you to sign up. You'll find more information on our website and in the newsletter and in 6 or 7 other places. So today, the free room. Oh, what is the free room? During the Living Green Festival, our clothing ministry folks and their auxiliary team created a free room in our faith development wing. They are hoping to have you take some of these wonderful treasures home with you. So the free room is in the faith development wing, which if you take a left out of the chapel, then you'll find signs that will take you up there. There are stairs, so if there's a mobility issue, maybe you can tag someone to look for something special for you. And I believe in the Emerson room, there might be some things that could be costumes for the coming holiday. I think there was a rumor of that, I don't recall. And one of my favorite ways for you to connect and participate is to join with us in supporting the work of this congregation. You support it with your love and with your service and with your financial gifts as well. There are many ways you can give. There are baskets at the back of the chapel for gifts today, or you can go to our website and click on the giving link, or you can text your gift because we are that cool now. So I don't know how to do it, but we are that cool now. So let us close our service as we sing together. Please rise and body your spirit as we sing our blessing to one another. Travel light and travel easy till I see you once again. Travel light and travel easy, and remember I'm your friend. May the road rise up to greet you as you leave your past behind. I will think about you gently, and I'll hold you in my mind. Sing to one another. Travel light and travel easy, till I see you once again. Travel light and travel easy, and remember I'm your friend. Remain standing as we extinguish our chalice. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again.